Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.
Welcome to The Money Factor. I'm Richard Naylor, your host. The CPI, the unemployment rate, such figures are very well known to people. They often come into the library and look things up like that. However, the data goes much deeper, as I'm learning. Our guest today is James Ross from the Department of Labor. He's a market analyst. He specializes in the Capital District, and we're really glad to have him on the show today. I want to welcome you, Jim, to the show.
Thank you, sir. It's great to be here.
And I guess I didn't really know when I went to the website how much was on there and how it all fit together. So maybe we could start with just a little perspective about how does your department fit into the overall mission of the Department of Labor?
Well, the Department of Labor is very broad-based. It has a lot of different functions. It's got worker protection activities, unemployment insurance certainly is one of the big parts of that. Another large portion of the Labor Department is the employment service, finding people jobs and finding workers for businesses. And it's not just a Department of Labor function anymore. There's a larger workforce system that is in place. It includes certainly the Department of Labor is one of the major partners, but also a lot of the county employment and training agencies. In this area, there's the Albany, Schenectady, Rensselaer County employment training entities, as well as the City of Albany. So there's 4 locals, Department of Labor, and other smaller partners as well. The Job Corps is in there. The welfare to work programs are all in there. A lot of other entities as well. Education Department is there with their VESED program for disabled people. So it's a large workforce system now. And our role is to supply the information that is needed by those partners to accomplish their task, which is to, again, find jobs for job seekers and to find workers for businesses, which is becoming a more and more of a problem these days. We'll get into that, I think, a little bit later.
For some people, that's a good problem, and for others?
Exactly. Right. So that's really our role, is to supply the labor market information needed to make that system work better.
So different people are going to think of the Department of Labor in different ways, depending on whether they've been applying for insurance or whether they need a job or whether they are looking for statistics.
Exactly. And our customers, we may have the same data, but different customers will use it for different reasons. A job seeker going to a job interview may want to know what's the wage I should be asking for. So what's the median wage that this occupation pays, so I know what to ask. Businesses may use that same information. I'm having trouble keeping workers, or I can't find anybody to take this job opening I have. Maybe the wage I'm offering is too low. So they'll go and they'll use our wage data to, again, determine a proper wage for the occupation.
It's a lot cheaper than a survey on your own.
Certainly, yeah.
That would be almost impossible.
Exactly.
What kind of data? I mentioned 2 things. I don't know really. I don't think you do the CPI, but you do somehow measure a lot of things connected to the labor force. Well, what kind of things do you collect?
I guess our 2 biggest pieces of information that we put press release out on each month. Job counts by industry, so people get an idea of how the economy is doing. That's probably the broadest way to measure the local economy. Nationwide, we have the GPF,
right, the
gross national product.
Right.
I can say that.
And the gross domestic product. We'll get them both in there.
But locally, job counts are probably the broadest measure that we have. So we put those out each month. We also put out the unemployment rate, which always gets top billing. Usually the headline reads what the unemployment rate has done over the past year, over the past month. So those are our 2.
And that's kind of the bad news number. Sometimes it's good news that the bad news number went down, but it's the negative side. And I know you have the positive side too.
Well, the unemployment rates, they can be a lot of different uses.
The employment rate, I mean, is...
Well, the employment rate, we always want that to go up. But the unemployment rate, the purpose for the local unemployment rates was basically to distribute federal funds. So, if there were grant monies going out or something, everything else being equal, they would want to give out the money to an area that had a higher unemployment rate. Economic distressed area, they usually look at unemployment rates and poverty rates. So if you're applying for a grant, a high unemployment rate is much preferable, much more preferable, because chances are better that you're going to get the rate. But if you're a politician, you want to see low unemployment rates.
Right, right.
And generally people think of low unemployment rates as showing a very strong economy. Now that can be right or wrong. If you've got a lot of job losses, but all those people are losing their jobs and leaving the area, they're not unemployed here. So your unemployment rate still may stay fairly low, even though job counts are going down. So you really want to use those two pieces of information to get a much better idea of what's going on with the economy.
And to prepare for the show a little bit, I went through some of your data and your slides and found that there were more factors going on than I normally think of. I think most people know some of these things, but it's not every day that we put them all together. So I hope we can kind of connect a few dots today.
That'd be great.
Let's take a look at some individual pieces of information then that you put out. We can talk about each one. I think there are aspects that we can bring out. So we'll be kind of giving a lot of data, but also a little interpretation with it as well. And I think the first thing we wanted to do, something you put out, as you mentioned, the industry employment numbers. What's going on there? How do things look?
Well, things in the capital region look pretty good. If you compare 2000, before the last national recession, up until 2006, our most recent annual average, the local area actually outperformed the nation during that period, and certainly outperformed the state. We regained, well, in the first place, we didn't lose nearly as many jobs as either the state or the nation did in the last recession.
So that would have been the 91 area?
No, the 2001, 2002.
The 2001, I'm
the
about
most
10
recent,
years behind,
most
right.
recent recession. So our job losses were not as significant. And typically that's true of this area. We've got a much more stable economy with a large, well, obviously the state government is here, but also a large healthcare and a large education sector. Those tend to not isolate us completely, but do insulate us a little bit from the ups and downs of the business cycle.
Now the government, has it been pretty flat?
Well, long term, we've seen recently declines in federal and state government, but local governments have been showing growth.
Okay.
A lot of that in the certainly in the 90s, even early in this decade, were at local education entities, local school districts. But again, we'll see some of the demographics later. That population group is now starting to stabilize and will be declining in the near future. So we don't expect to see local schools adding as many jobs as they had in the past 10 to 15 years.
Now the other side of that would be unemployment rates.
Unemployment rates not at historic lows, but very near them. We're typically below the state and national rates. And again, in the last recession, when the national rates shot up, ours went up, but not too much. So we certainly outperformed the nation in terms of the unemployment rate as well.
I've always had a question. How do we compute that? You know, you think about the total labor force. There are a lot of workers. I know you also compute how many people are actually working, and you know the population. But the difference certainly isn't the unemployment rate. So
no.
Is it just the people who are still trying to find a job?
Well, they're actively seeking a job.
Okay.
A lot of people think that it's just people on unemployment insurance. So they say, well, people exhaust their benefits, so they're not unemployed anymore, so the rate is really a lot higher than you say it is. Well, that's not true. It's not, although unemployment insurance beneficiaries are a factor when we determine how many are unemployed. The definition of unemployed is actively seeking a job in the past 4 weeks, but not currently working.
So the only funnel that it would go through that might reduce that if they really gave up and weren't even pursuing a job.
Exactly, and that happens a lot in business downturns. People will say, I just can't find a job, nobody will hire me. I'd like a job, but I can't find one, so I'm going to stop looking.
I can see that's hard to count.
So
I don't know what you would
count.
Well,
on a national level, with a big enough survey, they can capture that number. They're called discouraged workers.
Okay.
But even at the statewide level, we just don't have a big enough survey to capture that. And at the local area, we don't really even use a survey to determine the data. And that's another point I want to get into in a second as to why it's not a great time series. But the method we use is to, at the upper level, we have a statewide estimate, a New York City estimate, and a balance of state estimate.
Okay.
And those are, we use surveys are part of that, although the survey's been reduced over the past 20 years, so we can't use just that anymore. So there's some other factors that are put into that as well. When we come up with that top side number, the balance of state, we then look at some of the real data that we have, such as unemployment insurance beneficiaries, people that have exhausted unemployment benefits, people that may have applied but weren't eligible for benefits. So we have those people in there. We then make estimates of the number of people who are just entering the labor force. You know, somebody gets out of school, they start looking for a job, they're a new entrant, they certainly aren't eligible for unemployment insurance benefits. Or people that are re-entering, someone has left to either further their education or have a child, or for whatever reason, now they're coming back into the labor market. So those people are estimated. And we come up with this, what we call a handbook estimate. And then we add those all up for those balance of state areas, and we say, okay, Albany-Detroit area has 10% of this total unemployed. Well, we know from the other larger survey-based information that here's the total number of unemployed in that area. So we'll take 10% of those and apply them to the Albany-Detroit area.
Okay, so you kind of get a realistic picture of the people that wish they had a job. Maybe they're not actively seeking, but...
Right. We use the hard data we have to estimate the number of people that are actually out there. But because of that, it's really a distributive series, and it's designed to compare different geographic areas over the same time period. So to say, Albany-Detroit area is lower than the national rate or the state rate over a specific time period. But it's not really a strong series to say, you know, from last year to this year, the unemployment rate went up by 0.3%.
Right.
It's not really designed to do that, although we do, you know, people do that all the time.
People do it all the time, but it's really the longer trends.
Exactly, you know, whether trending up or trending down. Now, the job count data is designed to be a time series, so that's a much stronger economic series to use to determine how the economy is doing. And those numbers, as I indicated, we did much better in the downturn than the nation or the state. When the recovery first began, we were matching the national recovery. We gained our jobs back faster than the nation did. Most areas of the state and statewide as a whole, they're still below where they were before the recession started, whereas this area is at record high job counts, and we're continuing to expand.
Now, some people, when they think about the number of jobs growing and the number of people unemployed, they also point out that, yeah, but what kind of a job is that? Because I know that some of the lower paying jobs, the service jobs in the McDonald's and the grocery stores and the cashiers, may be growing really fast, but how is the other one growing? So you also do some wage comparisons. Some is kind of an understatement.
Yeah, we do. You know, we know how many jobs there are. We know what the wages are in those specific industries.
So how are we doing in terms of wages?
Well, the wages over the again, the early part of, even during the recessionary period, we were seeing some increasing wages. Over the past 18 months, we've seen those real wages start to go down. Now, the wages that people actually paid have continued to go up. But adjusted for inflation, it has dipped a bit in the last, especially the last year. That's primarily because of increasing inflation, not because of any slowdown in wage growth. So wage growth has been there, and we're again near historic highs up until that last year of decline, historic highs in terms of real wages paid per job. You talked about the fact that a lot of the low-wage jobs are growing rapidly.
Right.
You know, the big thing that people always said is, well, we're losing our manufacturing jobs, which are high wage, and we're adding low-paying service sector jobs. Well, some service sector jobs are low-paying, but many of them pay more than manufacturing does. We've seen a large growth in the number of professional, technical, and scientific workers. A lot of our high-tech jobs are found there. They pay more than manufacturing does, and we've seen growth there. We've seen growth in the, it's called management of companies. It's more the corporate type jobs that are out there. We've seen growth there. That's one of our highest wage industries. We've seen growth in a lot of different industries. And we also have seen some shifts within industries in terms of the occupations that are growing or declining. Back in the, I don't know, about 4 years ago, the Federal Reserve Bank of New York did a study using census data. And they looked at the occupations that were growing and declining in the Albany-Detroit area. And what they found is that we're starting to see a higher percentage of high-wage jobs in this area, and high-skilled jobs, and fewer low-skilled
And that was Detroit?
jobs.
Did you say Detroit?
No, that was in the Albany-Detroit area.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Albany-Detroit metropolitan area. We do a set of occupational projections every couple of years. The most recent ones are 2004 to 2014. So when this Federal Reserve report came out, I said, well, what are we expecting to see in the future? So I just kind of used some of the major categories, those occupational categories. We have wage data that we develop that I talked about earlier. and that's done on a twice a year. So I applied the wage data to those occupational categories, sorted them by highest to lowest, and said, okay, what are we seeing here? Turns out that over the next 10 years, about 2/3 of the job growth that we expect to see are going to be in jobs that pay above the current median, which is I think about $32,000 a year. So we're expecting to add more high-wage jobs than we are low-wage jobs, even though there will be a growth in the low-wage jobs. So there should be ample, well, hopefully there'll be ample jobs for all the people entering the
and that's really what we
market.
want to see in this area. We've been trying to develop Tech Valley and looking for the incubator companies and trying to bring in people from out of state. So that is good news.
Yeah. So we're not just adding jobs numerically, but we're adding quality jobs as well, and we expect that to continue into the future.
Now, we kind of touched on this a second ago when I brought out this negative thing about, well, what about the wages? And of course, we could add people to McDonald's and to the low-paying jobs. That's not what's happening. But let's look a little finer focus at the service area. I noticed in one graph that the education and health is really shot up as compared to retail and professional and business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the educational health services is certainly one of the largest industries we have. We've got and both of those, we've got a large educational sector, a large number of colleges and universities in the area, also a large healthcare sector. We actually export health services,
okay.
Especially at some of our larger hospitals, Albany Med, St. Peter's. People come in from outside to use those services, so that's actually an export industry.
Do we
for us.
also have a lot of openings in that area?
Yeah, certainly healthcare. Healthcare nationwide, there's a large shortage
It's almost a
of
dumb
workers
question.
in that industry. But we're also seeing shortages in almost every other industry as well. And as the economy continues to expand, coming out of the recession, those shortages are getting worse.
I guess typically then you would look for that wage differential to put some pressure on the upward side.
That's usually one of the first avenues that people use. Well, I can't find enough workers, I'll just pay more.
Right.
And that's a good idea in the short term, but again, when it's a general labor shortage, everybody starts pushing those wages higher, and that's when we get some pretty rapid inflation. And essentially, they'll just start stealing workers from each other. And one of the problems that we're seeing in terms of growth towards the future is a shortage of workers, not a shortage of jobs, but a shortage of workers. Primary reason for this is the aging of the baby boom population. We're, I think the oldest baby boomers are going to be about 62 this year, or 61 this year. And when they get, they start to retire, and we just don't have the numbers behind them to replace them. The baby boomers have been driving both our culture and our economy since, we had Howdy Doody on television. First, we built all those schools.
Right.
Back in the
I confess
50s and early 60s.
I'm part of that wave.
I remember half my elementary years were spent at a church classroom because they had to rent the space. The school didn't have enough classrooms. We had to rent space at the church to satisfy the need. Then those kids all aged out of that, and suddenly schools started shutting down. My old elementary school is now a senior citizen center out on Central Avenue. I grew up in Colonie.
Most of our focus has been, I think, on how do we pay for caring for these people. Perhaps that's a reflection of our political clout. What about the focus if we turn that light over on the younger people? What we've looked at is how are they going to manage to pay for us, because there are fewer of them. But what's the dynamic for them in terms of jobs? It seems, are we not saying that they can write their own ticket, that they can do what they want?
It's close to that. It's close to that. And again, for this area to continue to grow economically, we're going to have to do one of several things. We have to either grow our own, which means we're going to better educate the people that we have.
And we do have a lot of colleges.
We can't waste anybody.
Right.
In 20 years ago, when the baby boomers were all coming in, an employer could say, well, I've got 100 applicants for 5 openings. So I don't care if these other people are educated or have the skills or not, because I don't need those people. Where now, everybody is important. So we've got to make sure that everybody has the skills and the education that's necessary for an increasingly complex labor market.
And that must explain all of our focus on education these days.
Exactly.
And no child left behind because we can't afford to.
You see places like the Business Council.
Right.
One of their primary focus that they have is on education and increasing the skills. So you see a lot of business groups doing that. The other thing is to try to attract workers or retain workers that we have. There's a big push to keep the college students because, again, we do have a large number of colleges. So kids come from all over the Northeast, all over the world really, to go to school here. How do we keep them here? We don't want them to go somewhere else for employment. We want them to stay here. So there's a lot of programs that are out there to try and people talk about as retaining those kids, but in many cases it's really a case of attracting them, because when I went to college, I went to Buffalo, and I didn't really think of myself as a resident of Buffalo who had to be retained. These people come to Albany, and their intention is to then leave after they graduate.
Right.
So the idea is to try and attract them to this area. Luckily, we've got them here for a number of years to try and do that. So we've got to attract people, or we've got to grow our own in order to provide the workers.
To attract them, we have to give them an attractive occupation, an attractive job.
An attractive job, and also an attractive place to live. That's one of the I wouldn't call it a problem myself, but one of the problems that the people are having is that it's a great place for families. So, but a lot of kids when they first graduate want to go to a bigger city, want to go someplace that's more exciting. Then, in 10 more years, they'll say, Albany, that was a really nice place. That would be a great place to raise a family. So a lot of people do come back to the area.
I'm tired of the noise. I'm tired of the crime.
Right. So that they want to come back to a nice place with a great lifestyle. We've got mountains, we've got lakes. We're close to the major cities if you want to get there. So it's a great place to live, but it's not necessarily great for a 21-year-old. So
you think of Boston, you think of Colorado, perhaps when you're young.
New York City.
And New York City, right.
So I think there's been a lot of things that have happened to make it a little bit more of an exciting city for recent college graduates.
Now, you have a lot of statistics on industries, and I wonder if anything stands out in terms of trends. What industries are really doing well in terms of growth, and which ones are maybe a little average?
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess we'll start with the big loser, and that's been manufacturing. And that's a long-term trend, and it's not specific to this local area or to New York State. I think nationally, jobs in manufacturing peaked in 1979, and they've been going up and down since then. But the general trend has been lower. Part of that is our jobs moving offshore.
Right. They used to move south, and now
they move offshore. But the largest part is increased productivity, and they're forced to increase productivity, and they will be in the future. Again, without enough workers to be there, they're going to need to find ways to produce more with fewer workers, and that's really what's pushed the manufacturing job counts down.
Now, is that what you're calling the goods-producing industries?
Yeah, goods-producing is anything that you have something in your hand
right.
when you're done. Construction,
so that's
you've got to
manufacturing.
Mining, you've got some sort of a product. Manufacturing, you've got goods, either hard goods or soft goods, depending on how long they're expected to last.
And we'll put this graph up as some of the other ones. This one's pretty dramatic about manufacturing.
And has been the big decliner, right?
Right.
Although you can see over the last couple of years, we've actually seen a leveling off and actually a slight increase
since
in the number of
2003, it looks like.
Right. Now, I don't think that's a long-term trend. I think that we'll probably still continue to trend downward. Even when AMD gets built, that'll help, but it's not going to make up for a lot of the lost jobs. So we'll generally continue to see losses in manufacturing. But we've got a lot of other industries that are growing, that pay equally well wages, that are growing. Again, I mentioned the professional, technical, scientific portion of that, where we find a lot of our high-tech jobs. Research and development has been one of our big growth areas. We've got a lot of large R&D facilities. General Electric's got one in Niskayuna, Knowles Atomic Power Lab, the Health Resources, which is part of the kind of a nonprofit from the health department, is a large organization. What's going on over at Albany Nanotech? Those jobs are primarily R&D, so we're seeing a big growth in research and development type jobs. Again, pay very well.
I guess certain people should be listening to that, because maybe a college student who's just choosing a major, that would be a good time. I could see if you start too young, I don't know what the target's going to be in 15 years, but certainly in 5 to 10 years, it looks like you're seeing pretty well. It's going to be high tech and science.
And healthcare.
And
healthcare is going to be there as well.
So by bio health.
But it's pretty broad. Where we expect to see growth in the coming years, and again with a shortage of workers, almost anything is going to be, and us getting old, right? and almost anything will be pretty successful. So you don't have to, I don't know if you have to target that well, what you're going to have to target are some of your skills, because all jobs are going to require more technical type skills, more computer-oriented skills.
Right.
Doesn't matter what you do. A lot of jobs are going to require more science-related skills. So it may be that a college student looking to pick a major, maybe that's too late. Even a high school student may be too late.
Okay.
It's really time for the middle school students to start deciding that they're going to need to take the math courses and they're going to need to take the science classes. My son's in 8th grade right now. He's getting ready for 9th grade and he's got to pick his courses. Well, we're going to make sure he takes science and we're going to sure he takes as high level math as we can, because those are the skills that are going to be required in the future. Also, foreign languages. With more and more of a global economy, people are going to need to have a foreign language. So,
and I think you probably have some skills in statistics, which wouldn't discourage that.
I have a
probably.
few. Yeah, I have a few. I have more skills in economics. Those statistics,
Okay.
that's it's almost like accounting for me. There's too many numbers.
It can be very difficult and very confusing. It's a difficult area. I've had conversations with people and I've struggled. But I really believe that it's one of the fundamental things that people today need to know in order to understand your graphs and why they can't trust this one, but that one's good.
Exactly. I mean, even if you look at a cashier now, the skills they need to run a cash register are pretty amazing. So pretty much any job now is going to require a lot of those computer skills. It used to be we had white-collar workers and blue-collar workers, and you could tell the difference. Now you could look at a white-collar worker sitting in front of a computer terminal doing their job, look at a machinist sitting in front of their computer terminal doing their job.
And you can't tell the difference.
You can't tell the
from
difference.
outside.
Maybe what the clothes they wear, but that's about it.
Right. Now, we could talk about individual jobs, and I think that's interesting. For a moment, though, let's just mention what you have on your website, because just in general, it's a wealth of information. I noticed you have the median salary, you have the mean salary, you have a beginning salary, you have an expert salary, something like
Experienced wage.
Experienced
right?
salary. And this goes for very fine breakdowns of jobs.
Yeah, wage data used to be a real problem for us. We didn't used to have really good wage information by occupation. We had good industry wage data, but not very good occupational wage data. The best we could do is, well, we know what people who are collecting unemployment insurance used to make, and we know what their occupation was. So if we had enough of those people, we could kind of determine what they were making in the past. But
could be a skewed sample.
Exactly, very skewed sample. But in 2000, the federal government decided to add a wage question to one of their surveys. We have, for years, have been in a state federal cooperative. We have a lot of our data series are like this. It's the Occupational Employment Statistics Program. The primary purpose of that program was to find out what the occupational distribution is within industries. So, okay, in manufacturing, how many machinists do you have? How many secretaries do you have? How many managers do you have? So very, specific occupations. And that would allow us to do occupational projections, to let people know what types of, what will be in demand in the future. Well, there was a discussion because, nationwide, there wasn't really good wage data. Can we attach a wage question? Not only how many people work in each occupation, but what are they paid? And there was a lot of discussion because, well, if we add that, that's going to be a lot more work. Will they not answer the survey? So there was a lot of discussion. But starting in 2000, we did attach that wage question. So since then, and every year, you add a little bit more to the sample. So the sample's gotten bigger and bigger. So we've got more and more occupations that we can actually report on now, and some slightly smaller geographic areas than we could in the past. So
well, that makes me
we now
feel
have
better.
Excellent wage data.
Right, because I didn't used to see that, and suddenly, I don't know where I've been for the last 5 years. You probably had it on your site, but just so people know, there's like 28 pages or something of individual occupations with all of this information.
Yeah, we've got that down to the regional level. So each of the 10 regions in New York State, we've got that wage data.
Another interesting thing about your data that you have is how do you, I think you even do something of this. You can combine things. You can say, okay, this industry is gaining people by this number. This many people are going to retire from that industry. And then you can even look at how many new jobs and how many jobs there are. You can even get a percentage maybe of what the turnover is.
Yeah, or the replacement need. It's not necessarily turnover, but
Okay.
it's replacement need. And that's, again, in our occupational projections. Kind of the method we use to do that, we estimate, we have the base year. And in this latest case, it was 2004. And then we look 10 years out. Okay, in 2014, what are the industries going to do? So we do a forecast of those industries. And then we have those occupational distributions from the OES survey. So we say, okay, what are the occupations in each of those industries? So okay, now we have an out year for occupations. Well, not every industry is going to remain unchanged over that period. There's a lot of occupational shifts that go on. Maybe more professional, technical, less clerical. We've got the automation of the office, so we've got less typists and things out there. So industries are shifting what occupations are there. So we have those factors included in that as well. So we may see certain occupations within industry growing more or less.
A lot of tools for a guidance counselor.
So then we've got the out year, and then we say, okay, well now we know what the growth is going to be, but the largest factor in terms of employment needs is going to be replacement.
Okay.
Okay, we also have factors that we use to estimate based on the growth what the replacement need is going to be, and there are several definitions for that. The one we use is net replacement need. So when we publish something on our website, and you see an annual number of openings, those are the number of newly trained people that are going to be needed each year in that occupation.
Now this is kind of a question that just occurred to me, but is there any data on scarcity? Because I remember when I was going to school, some friends of mine said, engineering, that's the place to be. And by the time we got through high school and college, he was out of work because everybody had heard that message. Mm-hmm. And there was a glut of engineers. I'm sure that didn't last for 20 years, but he was doing construction for a while. Is there any way to gauge scarcity?
At this point, there's not a good way. The U.S. Department of Labor has put out some small pilots in the past to do basically to measure demand, the same way that we measure unemployment and unemployment rates, people that are unemployed. They would try and measure existing openings that are currently available. A lot of places in Europe do this. They have surveys that do that. And we've done that. I know that in our North Country office they did that, but it was only every 6 months that they did the survey. So again, it costs money to do this. There's not a lot of extra money in the federal statistics program to do this right now. But that would certainly give us a much better tool, because as I mentioned before, you can have a low unemployment rate, but it doesn't mean that demand is strong. It just means that the supply is low, possibly because people are leaving. Now that's not been the case in this area. We've actually had an influx of people moving to the RBCT Troy area since 2000. So that's not why our unemployment rate is low. But that could be the case. But having those two sets of data could tell you that. You could have a low unemployment rate and a high vacancy rate, and that says, okay, you've just got too many jobs, not enough people, so we need to do something to add people. You could have a high unemployment rate and a high vacancy rate, which means, well, there's a lot of demand, but there's also a lot of supply. So what's the problem there? It must be that these people don't fit the jobs that are in demand. So
I see.
Maybe we need some retraining to make those.
So there are a lot of things that you can go by as long as you look at present case. We know that there's a nursing shortage, for example.
Right. Well, yeah. And that's really the way that we find out about shortages, is that the industry makes that known. It started with healthcare. They were the first ones saying, we've got to get into the schools and let kids know that these are good jobs, because we just don't seem to be attracting enough people. Well, then I go and either read an article or you go to a construction conference and they're saying, we've got these really good jobs. Kids don't seem to be interested in this anymore. We've got to get into the schools and let them know that these are good jobs. Then you go to manufacturers, and even though they've lost a large number of jobs, kids don't seem to be going into manufacturing anymore. We need to let them know we've got these good jobs now. Well, one of the things is that all these industries don't realize is that there's not that many kids in school anymore, and that we've seen a decline in that age group. So they're all suffering again from this general labor shortage. So it's not a us versus them. We're all in this together, and we've all got to do something to, again, either increase the skills and the education of the workers, or try to attract workers from the outside.
And we'll probably try to do both.
Yes, certainly.
We're almost out of time. I know time just flies, especially with a topic like this. It's very complicated. I did want to make sure that we cover a couple more things. Mm-hmm. Anyway, we have a change in population by age, which you mentioned. Could we just go back through that a little bit? How does that wave work? Obviously, the baby boomers has been described as a wave. Mm-hmm. But then there are these
tidal wave almost.
Then there are these dips behind, and another one behind that.
Yeah, the sort of the children of the baby boomers. So we saw, especially during the early part of this decade, the first 5 years, we were seeing some pretty good growth in the number of people just sort of entering that labor force. I think the 15 to 20-year-olds. So we saw some growth there, and that's one of the reasons that education demand was going up, education jobs were going up. Well, that growth has now sort of, behind that, the numbers just aren't there. So that growth during the current 5 years is pretty much flat, and we expect to see that decline in the future. The big jump is in the number of baby boomers, but they're all reaching retirement age.
And we know this is a problem all over the world, and some places really,
some
like
worse,
Japan and
Europe.
Germany is
Western
both
Europe
really
is having
bad.
really big problems.
How bad is it here?
Well, it's certainly enough to transform the economy again. You talked about when you were first and your friends were first entering the labor force. I first came in the late 70s. I was kind of in the middle of the baby boom. Well, there was this huge influx in the starting really in the 70s and going through the 80s, and we saw really big increases in unemployment rates. Not only did we have the baby boomers coming in, but with the increased participation rate of women starting in the 60s, we had this big, flood of even more women coming in. So we had this big jump, and the federal government said the unemployment rate is so high, we've got to heat up the economy a bit, increase demand so that we can create some jobs. Well, they did that, but there's no way they could heat it up enough, and it became overheated. So that's when we started to see really high inflation rates, 10%, 12%. Same time we had high unemployment rates. It was because all these baby boomers are coming in. Well, we're about to have the reverse of that. All these baby boomers start to leave. So we could see problems as significant as we saw when they were first coming in.
And you did point out we are living in a large community, not just the Capital District. We're living in the United States and the world. And so we're going to suffer, to some extent, I guess, from things happening in the South and the West and all around.
Yeah, one of the problems is that it won't be just us with this need for workers. It's going
we can't just get them from somewhere else.
We can't just go easily to somewhere else and say, well, we've got jobs here. Why don't you just come here? It's going to be a nationwide event. So it becomes very problematic to really show the quality of life. We've got to have a reason that people would want to come here, because it's not going to be just for jobs. They'll be able to get jobs wherever else they are. So we really want to show what a great place this is to live and work in.
There was a slide about working age population that kind of helps with this, and we can put that up. Do you want to describe that a little bit?
Yeah, depending on what the working age of your industry or occupation is, the number of available workers in the population to really draw from, the pie, has either already peaked and is starting to drop, or it's going to peak in the next several years. Again, if your industry or occupation has a retirement age closer to 65, those numbers are still going up slightly, but after 2010, again with the retirement of the baby boomers, those numbers are going to start to drop. If you say construction or even some nursing jobs, people tend to retire earlier just because of the physical nature of the job. So if 55 is your retirement age, we're already seeing declines in that size of that pie. So again, everybody's going after these same workers, but there's fewer and fewer of those workers to grab hold of.
And we're also trying to get them more educated at the same time.
Exactly.
So which is
we need to get them more educated because there's fewer and fewer of them. So yeah, that's the big problem going forward. It's not, typically and historically it's been, how do we get more jobs? Jobs isn't, we still got to concern ourselves with that, because if you ignore that completely, pretty soon you'll start to see jobs drop and drop.
And we are competing with the rest of the country still. So
exactly.
No matter what,
we
may have to work hard to stand still.
But a big part of that is, can we provide the workers? Because when businesses are first looking at this area, that's what they ask. Do you have the workers? If you don't, I'm not even going to consider it. So show me you've got the workers. And then after that, they may ask what the wage is. I've always been able to tell what the business cycle is like. If an employer is looking at this area and their first question is wage, their second question is availability, well, the economy is probably pretty weak. If the economy is really strong, they're going to say, do you have enough workers?
Right.
If you do, then what do I have to pay them?
Right.
So yeah, it's always been a pretty good indicator for me.
I think that's about the end today. I want to thank you, Jim, for being here.
Well, thanks for having me.
I think we could bring you back and continue right where we are. So hopefully in a few months or so, we'll ask you back.
That'd be great.
So I hope you enjoyed the show. I want to invite you to our next show and hope you have a great week. Take care.
Welcome to Channel 17, The Town of Colonie Government Channel.